Hello and welcome to NTD's exclusive special coverage following the first 2024 GOP primary debate. We'll delve deep into the highlights and lowlights where the GOP hopefuls clashed in a battle of ideas, rhetoric, and vision for the future of our nation. Stay with us as we go beyond the headlines, beyond the sound bites, and bring you an informed and balanced perspective on what transpired tonight. Joining us now, we have Roger L. Simon, director of the Presidential Roller Coaster 2024 on Epoch TV, and columnist for the Epoch Times, Carrie Sheffield, senior policy analyst with Independent Women's Forum, and Doug Billings, host of The Right Side. Carrie, I'd like to start with you. Give us your overall consensus of tonight's debate, highlights and lowlights, in your opinion.
Well, the low light was that it was a total split screen moment. For me personally, I chose to log in to watch on Twitter with President Trump and Tucker Carlson, and then you have the rest of the also rans on the other stage, so to speak, at least from his perspective. So that's what made it sort of this really weird kind of dichotomous evening in a way that I've never witnessed as a political observer my whole life. So that's what I thought was really interesting. Just the big takeaway that Trump sees himself as head and shoulders above everybody else. And in terms of the folks who were on the stage, I didn't think that it really moved the needle for anybody. So I don't expect anything to go beyond status quo. I thought it was interesting to watch Mike Pence repeatedly try to go after Vivek Ramaswamy. I think that probably helps Vivek in the sense that Mike Pence isn't doing so popular when you look at how he's doing in the polls. I mean, I like Mike Pence. Anybody on that stage would be light years ahead of the current occupant of the White House. I just didn't, nobody really came across as a screen grab moment from my perspective that's going to move the needle beyond the trajectories currently. I did think that Vivek had some great moments. And I thought that Ron DeSantis, he needed to really punch above where he is currently, and I just don't think he got there.
Doug, what are your thoughts on that? Vivek, he got a lot of airtime tonight, probably more. I mean, of course, he was number two in the polling, therefore he was center stage, so naturally he would get a little bit more. You also had DeSantis, as Carrie mentioned, he didn't seem to take as much initiative as some of the other folks. What was your take?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Carrie on that DeSantis didn't have a knockout night tonight. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was the same old Ron that we've seen, which, you know, he's forceful, he's passionate, he's articulate, but there was no breakthrough for him. Vivek, on the other hand, I got to tell you, I evolved in my thought process with him as the night went on. When he gave his opening statement, I thought, God, this sounds like it was written by a used car salesman. I just didn't think he had a really great opening statement. But as the night went on, I began to be convinced that this guy is talking to Gen Z folks, and he is a youth movement person. We need to keep him in mind, because what we're lacking as conservatives is a succession plan of young people within the conservative movement. And I think for those of us who are of a certain age, I'm the last of the baby boomer generation. Some of us might not greet his delivery with a certain amount of acceptance, but I think he was talking to young people, and I think it will resonate with Gen Z folks throughout the conservative movement and also Gen Z independents.
Roger, of course, we want to save your veteran opinion for last. What is your take?
Veteran. Anyway, as far as Vivek Ramaswamy is concerned, I am a veteran because I've interviewed him 3 times and made a video with him. So we've gotten to be fairly much friends, and I expected him to be pretty good. I certainly agree with Doug that he kind of blew it on the opening speech, which was boilerplate, to say the least. On the other hand, he did very well, particularly when backing Trump, because the irony is that what the audience wanted to hear was pro-Trump. And the other interesting thing about it, I think, is my wife, in the midst of it, who was paying attention to the Tucker Trump thing, which I was jealous I wasn't doing, and the figure that came out on Truth Social is that they had 75 million people in the first hour. Those are Tucker numbers, and if those numbers are remotely true, then if you did the math, rough math, maybe they had 6 or 7 million people watching the Fox debate. So, this was truly an undercard, as Trump was predicting. The fact that I think Vivek did marginally better. He's been in the conversation for the vice presidential nod for couple months now, really, and that may prove to be that's usually unpredictable. But I think he helped himself in that regard.
So we're going to talk about the Trump Tucker event, the counter program to tonight's GOP debate in just a little while. Kerry, I want to get your thoughts. I think obviously the question loomed large over the debate as to whether or not Trump's absence was going to help him, hurt him, help the other candidates. I was somewhat surprised that it took them a while to invoke former President Trump.
Well, I think that was by design by the moderators because they didn't want to emphasize the fact that he had not joined their debate. It made them look bad. So I think they purposely punted it to later in the show to not put salt in the wound and to remind the audience freshly who was not there. So I think that was I think that was smart on their part.
Factor. The same thing is that Trump just does not like Fox, and he has not liked Fox for some time because of the Chris Wallace affair during the previous election, when Wallace wouldn't let him talk about the Hunter Biden laptop, which was a disastrous move on the part of Wallace. It was quite horrible and a low point in American journalism, I thought. And so since then, and then with Tucker being fired by Fox, they've lost popularity with the right greatly.
Doug?
I think Trump. So it was truly an undercard. Tonight was the undercard event. We all know that. Everybody wanted to be watching Trump. I think that what the candidates do. I think Vivek is the one that survived that question. Clearly, Nikki lost it. Chris Christie, we already knew what he was going to say. If Nikki had any hope of being a cabinet member, she blew it tonight. If she had any hope of being a VP, which would have been a slim to none chance, but Vivek nailed it, calling him the best president in the 21st century. Clearly he's the most substantial president. And I know that there will be people who would say, what about George Washington? What about Abraham Lincoln? I'm not saying he was the best. I'm saying that Trump is the most substantial president this republic has had in modern time for sure, and likely all of history. And the fact that people can't say that, nobody likes Pence. Pence lost it from the beginning. And by the way, I'll say this about Pence, and I might be diverting into another segment of your show here, Steve, but Pence did have precedent to put on hold the election. It was done in the late 1800s. And we could have done it again. And he continually says that we wanted him, or Trump wanted him, to overturn the election. That's a lie. He simply said, let's take a break and recount, and let's get the count right. And there is precedent for that. But I think Vivek won. I think that he came out on top with regards, especially to the Trumpisms that we all wanted to hear. The MAGA movement now is in love with it. If enough people see these clips, and that's the question, if enough people see this, Vivek will overtake DeSantis in the polls.
Well, Doug, to your point,
I think we agree there.
I want to pull up some sound and get everybody's reaction to it. It's SOT 10 on our production side. If we could pull that up and get your reaction on the other end.
If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
Kerry, some might argue that was the most significant moment of the night. What's your take?
Well, so I'm on the press list for a number of campaigns, and the Vivek Ramaswamy campaign sent out a tweet noting that Ron DeSantis waited and looked and glanced over at what was Vivek doing.
Right.
And it was only after Vivek raised his hand that Ron raised his hand, which is so telling in terms of how Ron runs his life these days. And what's interesting is that I like Ron, and I feel like he's not the presidential candidate that he's been as a governor. I mean, he seems like he's a follower as a presidential candidate, even though I just love him as a governor, where he's been a leader in Florida.
Roger, I haven't had a chance to check Truth Social, but I have a feeling the former president's going to have something to say about that one.
He will. Yeah, no, I don't know if he's going to comment very much on this debate, actually, because it wasn't all that consequential. I think I don't like him beating up on DeSantis that much because I think it's like beating a dead horse. When you're so far ahead, why doesn't he just concentrate on Biden and the awful things that the Republican administration has been doing? I mean, that's what we need to hear from him more than, whether DeSantis is sanctimonious or whatever, epithet he's hurling.
Well, you know what? He actually is doing that. Trump is actually. He's
It's
actually
getting
started.
more of that way.
Well, if I read correctly, he's actually started a large, substantial advertising by attacking Joe Biden specifically. So I think he is already starting to pivot. And I did watch I went back and forth during the commercial breaks and watched the Twitter and the debate. And he hit Biden a lot. He hit Harris a lot as well. So I think he's already kind of pivoting in that direction.
Doug, does that moment kind of sum up DeSantis's night, just sort of the reluctance to jump in?
It does.
Unfortunately,
it's right on the head.
Yeah, it's very
Sorry,
bad.
Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, Kerry hit it right on the head. You saw DeSantis look. Everyone to Vivek's right, as you're looking at everybody to his right, kind of, especially Ron. Look, what am I supposed to? Oh, I guess if Vivek's raising his hand, I'd better do it too. And Vivek went right up, no question, no doubt in his mind. He would support President Trump.
You know what Vivek handled beautifully today? The idea that he's 38. He made me. I'm twice his age. Although I have played tennis with him, so that's it's called hanging in there. But he made clear something that I think a lot of people respond to, that we need new people. We really need new people. And the other thing that is forgotten in all this is that Thomas Jefferson was, I think, 32 when he wrote the Declaration, and Alexander Hamilton was 21 when he signed the Constitution. So, we have a geezer world by compared to our founders.
Well, you know what was so interesting? So I'm a part of the millennial generation. I'm a grandma millennial. I like to joke I'm on the older end, but to see the contrast between Mike Pence and Vivek was, I think, the most fascinating dynamic for me of the night, because it really was this generational struggle. Because Mike Pence was talking about Ronald Reagan, and Vivek was like, "You need a new slogan." He's like, "You have to be more realistic. That we have a mental health crisis in this country. Not all is well in America. We actually have a crisis of meaning." And I agree with Vivek. As much as I love Ronald Reagan and as much as I honor his legacy, I thought it was so fascinating, this sort of intergenerational struggle. And I personally came on the side of Vivek, that it is true, like the things that Vivek says about we have a crisis of meaning in this country, that so many young people today, even compared to when their parents were my age and younger, they are far more secular. And it's going in the wrong direction, that we're replacing God with things that are, the created instead of the creator, even though our founding documents talk about that we get our inalienable rights from the creator. So I think Vivek understands what's happening at a much more visceral level in terms of the generational shift that Mike Pence doesn't understand.
We actually have
but Pence is extreme in that way. But I just want to say to you, Steve, you've got a constellation of three people here who absolutely agree with each other. Normally in these shows, you need to get someone who doesn't agree. It's funny to see, but that's, what that tells me is actually when three people who don't know each other agree on something like this, well, maybe we're close to the truth.
That's an excellent point, Roger. I do have some sound from an exchange with Vivek and Pence. Let's play that sound.
I mean, look, Joe Biden has weakened this country at home and abroad. Now is not the time for on-the-job training. And
Doug?
Yeah, so what we have in Vivek has now positioned himself to be the image of the founding father, young, youthful, an outsider coming in, an entrepreneur, somebody who's made his way in the real world, exactly what every one of the founding fathers did. They did not have experience in government when they set about creating this great experiment of our republic. They had no experience in any of that. So for Pence, who's been a lifelong politician, and everybody else on the stage who's been these lifelong politicians, to criticize Vivek on this makes no sense. Pence is a loser through and through. He has no chance to win the nomination. He has no chance to extend any kind of role in the cabinet of whoever the next president may be. And Vivek, I think, has now a brilliant position. He's young, he's youthful, he's exactly what, and he says things that we all want to hear. He had a great line with climate change. It's the greatest myth perpetuated upon mankind. The only other thing I could have said was COVID. But he says those kinds of things out loud. All of us are hungry to hear that kind of truth, and he won on those points.
Yeah, my only complaint with the climate change thing, which I well know his view on it because I share it, is that I wish he had more time to tell it more clearly and loudly to the audience, because I think that's one of the things that the world really needs to hear, because it's probably the original hoax before all these other hoaxes.
And you know, one of the things I was disappointed that wasn't brought up was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They could have segued him into this. He is a contender, and he's polling in a significant fashion, and they didn't bring him up. I think that was a mistake. I think he should have been brought up. And from what I'm hearing, I didn't watch it, and I haven't seen it yet. Not even Tucker and Trump mentioned Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So they're I don't know why that is, but not a good move. He's a contender.
Okay, well, you want some disagreement? I'm going to disagree with you. I don't like RFK. I like him on COVID. He not everything he says, but I like that he calls out the medical establishment for all of the horrific just shutdowns and the mindless masking and stifling the truth about the origins of COVID. So he's raising a lot of important questions in the Democrat Party, and so I'm glad he's doing that. But the thing is, like on abortion, for example, he said something pro-life, but then his taskmasters were like, "Oh no, I didn't mean to say that," and then he completely reversed course to say completely being pro-abortion. And then economically, he's sort of like your traditional big government Democrat, and we just don't need that. Like we're more than 30 trillion.
No, wait
No,
a minute.
he's
No,
not.
so I don't think you
No,
have to
he's
like
not a
him.
big
I'm not saying that I like
you're
him.
right.
I'm not
You're
saying
right
that I
on
like him.
abortion.
I'm just saying they didn't bring him up. They didn't bring him up, and it's a mistake not to bring him up. Robert F. Kennedy
I
Jr.
agree
is the last. He's the last of the true Democrats. Every other Democrat in the elected class, and this is important to realize for everybody, every Democrat who's in the elected position that they're not Democrats anymore. They've combined communism and socialism. They are the Commu-Socialist Party. They're not pro-America. They're not pro-life. They are absolutely abjectly opposed to the great republic that we have.
So
Robert F.
I
Kennedy
want
Jr.
to bring
is
us.
the
I just want to
last
bring
of the
us
true
back.
Democrats.
I just want to bring us back to the debate for a moment. There were some other significant moments tonight. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, he did have one, and I want to play that sound for you guys.
As your president, I will never let the deep state bureaucrats lock you down. You don't take somebody like Fauci and coddle him. You bring Fauci in, you sit him down, and you say, Anthony, you are fired.
Kerry, did that resonate?
It seemed like it was a canned line. I mean, yes, I agree with it, but I don't think it broke through because here's my take on Ron. His leaked little playbook, I think he was so embarrassed by that leak that it was like he put himself in a box because he was worried if he went too aggressive on anybody on stage, then they would bring up that handbook. So that was part of why I think he boxed himself in. And it seemed like that was like the one line where he felt like he could be aggressive. So it's a good line, but it was obviously so rehearsed that it didn't really land that well for me.
You ripped it off from The Apprentice. You can't make a strong, unique, original point by ripping off a line from The Apprentice and saying you're fired.
Right. In any case, I think it's old news. We've known for a long time that Fauci had to go, And speaking of that, of course, Bobby Kennedy deserves a lot more credit than anybody for that because his book on Fauci is magnificent. The other thing that I would disagree with Kerry about is that he is not really a traditional Democrat on some of these things, and he's extremely good. 'Cause I did interview him for 5 hours. He is very good on the CIA because he really believes the CIA killed his uncle. And I will tell you something. I used to not believe that, but given the way the world has turned in the last few years, I have to tell my old friend Oliver Stone I forgive him because I think he was right.
Kerry, were you surprised at the way Vivek was able to kind of consolidate all of the, the conversation and almost shift a lot of the discussion at the debate?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, full disclosure, I actually put money on Vivek on predicted markets about a month ago. So I like him a lot, and so I was not surprised at all because I just going back to what I was saying earlier, like I think he really is channeling something on a deeper level than the superficial, tit for tat politics. He's tapping into the deep societal loss and yearning that my generation and Gen Z is feeling. And so I think because he understands how deep it is, that's how he's able to pull it because he speaks with such weight. And all of the other people on stage are career politicians. He's the only one who's not, and that's why I find it so refreshing. I think that's why he's so original. He's what Peter Thiel would call a 0-to-1 play. So he has this amazing book called 0-to-1, which is a 0-to-1 is a truly original person. Most companies are replicating an idea from a 1-to-many. And so everybody else on stage was a 1-to-many. Vivek is a 0-to-1.
Doug, Vivek
I like that book
actually
too.
he had a pretty powerful moment. I want to play it. We'll get your reaction on the other side, Doug.
All right.
Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
When he basically said that he was the only one on the stage that wasn't bought and paid for, it set the tone for a while and opened it up to other one-liners.
Well, you know
Yeah,
what?
it
You
did.
know what's interesting about that? There's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and actually written about. We were in a terrible situation and a good situation for Vivek and for Trump. Nobody trusts politicians who can't support themselves in their campaigns, because that's what he's saying effectively. That everyone else has to rely on some pack or other and some rich people who have something that they want out of them. And Trump presumably and Vivek presumably could do it on their own cash, so they can say whatever they want.
Doug?
Yeah, Vivek, he's right, of course. In some semblance, everyone on that stage, because they're politicians, because they've accepted money they are bought and sold. Even Ron DeSantis, I liked Ron DeSantis. Early on, I had this dream that DeSantis and Trump would be an invincible team. Trump president, DeSantis VP. But as soon as DeSantis began having lunches and dinners with Dominion people, that all shattered. He is bought and sold. He's bought and sold. Vivek is not. And he has this image. I agree with what Kerry said earlier. For the Gen Z, the millennials, he won the night for those kids. I mean, he talks just like them, and it set the stage to go in. I don't know if it was before or after, Steve, but the debate went into Ukraine and Russia. Vivek won that portion of it, and Nikki Haley was ranting and raving about it, and saying that he was Vivek was exactly right. Zelensky is not our friend. Putin, the only adult in the room over there, and Vivek called that out.
Kerry, I know Vivek might say otherwise, but is he running for VP?
I was talking about that. If he was offered the job, would he turn it down? And I'm like, in what universe would anybody turn that down? Like, you're one heartbeat away from the presidency, and you're 38 years old. To me, it wouldn't be rational for him to turn that down. I mean, maybe. Well, in that case, he might be learning how to be a politician. I forgot there was one person on stage who was not a career politician, which was Doug Burgum. but he was like a non-factor. I thought maybe because it was clever what he did with basically buying his presence on stage, which was to the point earlier on, not having to be reliant on other people. So in that respect, he wasn't bought and sold. In fact, he actually incentivized, I think, through a very creative entrepreneurial way to get on the stage. But I don't think it made any difference. I think he just was, and he built a company himself, so he could have been a lot. He could have had a breakout moment, but I knew once he broke his leg the day before that he just didn't have good judgment. So I wasn't expecting much.
One thing about Vivek, and I think Chris Christie was a bit prophetic at the beginning of the debate, is that he called Vivek the skinny kid who reminded him of Barack Obama. And Vivek just might turn out to be the Republican version of Barack Obama. I think Chris Christie was a bit accidentally prophetic there.
Yes,
Oh, I said that.
but boy is Christie angry. His hatred for Trump is practically pathological. It's beyond rational in any way. So Trump must have insulted him in some way he just couldn't handle. The other thing about Christie, I'm not supposed to say, but he certainly doesn't look like a guy who had bariatric surgery, but he did. So it's a hard thing to put together.
We have the sound. We have the sound that Doug just referenced from the debate. Let's play it.
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, "What's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here?" was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
Maybe a canned line, but maybe one of Christie's better moments.
Oh, I think it was his worst moment. Because I think that Vivek may well turn out to be exactly that. He might turn out to be the conservative version of what Barack Obama was. Look at what he's done. The talented young skinny kid who came out of nowhere. Are you kidding me? Who wouldn't want to be in that? That's exactly what Obama did. It backfired on Christie, and I don't think Christie thought that one through.
Yeah, well, maybe. But, you remember Obama destroyed our country, essentially.
Well, okay.
No. I'm not saying I support Obama. I'm not saying you want to be Obama. I'm saying is a
hold on, guys.
version.
We can't all talk at once. Carrie, please.
Okay. So I literally said the exact same thing about Vivek, that he could be the conservative Obama, probably about 2 months ago. That's part of why I actually put money on him in the predictive markets, because I was like, this guy is this and I've interviewed him before too. And he actually received an award last year for my Independent Women's Forum. We gave him our Gentleman of Distinction Award, and he came and gave a big speech. I chat with him. He retweets my stuff. I did a big CNN article about him on the opinion page last week. But part of why I think he could be what Obama could have been. He has the raw political talent that Obama has, and then Obama squandered and destroyed our country with that talent. Like, I feel like it's almost like Star Wars, like the light and darkness of the Force. Like, Vivek could be the racially unifying president that Barack Obama never was. Like, if you look at racial unity in this country, like Gallup has tracked racial relations since, I believe, like the 70s. Race relations were pretty good in America until 2015, until Barack Obama took the side of the BLM rioters, destroying billions of dollars of property, and then later on in 2020, murdering and killing dozens of people in the wake of the riots. Where was Barack Obama? He could have put a stop to that with the BLM riots. I personally believe that part of it was that he was channeling basically the spiritual influence of Jeremiah Wright, who was his longtime pastor of Barack Obama. Jeremiah Wright baptized his children, performed his wedding ceremony for Barack Obama, and he's a racist, anti-Semite, racially divisive person. That's the spiritual legacy that he passed on to Barack Obama, and that was what Obama brought to the White House. That's why race relations deteriorated at an accelerated rate under Obama, when he could have been what he promised us in 2004. I remember that at the convention, in the Democrat convention, where Barack Obama said there's no black or white America. No. His worldview is there is an evil white America and there is an oppressed black America, and we need to have them war with each other, Whereas Vivek is the exact opposite. He said, this is not a country of victims. This is a country of victors. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter if you're a child of immigrants. You can become a billionaire. And that's what he did.
So Vivek,
And I agree with that completely. In case I was unclear, what I meant by that was Vivek would be the conservative version of Obama, the better version, because Obama destroyed this republic. So that, to be clear, I agree with everything Kerry just said.
Well, you know who
So,
his
yes.
babysitters were.
well, let's. I'm going to switch gears here for a moment. Vivek seemed to dominate a large part of the debate and our discussion here.
And our discussion.
So, former President Trump, he's going to surrender for the Georgia case tomorrow. In his interview with Tucker Carlson, he again criticized, Trump did, the indictments against him, obviously, and went on to say that he believes that most Americans also agree that the charges don't stand. Let's watch part of what he said.
I got indicted 4 times. All trivia, nonsense, bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's horrible.
How do you do that? How do you get indicted, every week and stay cheerful?
It's, I think it's a lot easier because I'm so high in the polls, because it means the people get it. The people see it's a fraud.
Roger, do you think that these indictments weighing on the former president's mind, because he's a human being after all, it can't be pleasant to be going through, contributed to the fact that he did not attend the debate?
No. I think the first part of your premise is, of course, true. I mean, how could they not weigh on his mind? I mean, he is, as you say, a human being. But I think he didn't go to the debate simply because he's so far and away the front runner that there was no profit in him to it. I mean, he could only go down from the experience, no matter whether it was about indictments or any other thing in the world. There was no reason to go, and also he really dislikes Fox News. I mean, there's no question that he does. So just a couple of weeks before, Brett Baer had interviewed him and was extremely nasty, really, in the interview. So I think there were plenty of reasons. I don't think that was the motivating reason, but I do agree that he has to have this weighing on his mind. How could he not?
Doug, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was with him up at Bedminster a few weeks ago, and he's having fun. He's enjoying the people up there. He was playing disc jockey on his iPad, playing music for the crowd, laughing, having a great time. If it's affecting him, he's hiding it awfully well. It seems to be like water on the wing of a duck for him. Clearly, I think what he's thinking with regards to his attendance at the debate is, to summarize it, we all know, most of us, the 4 of us clearly, and anybody who's paying halfway attention to this, we know the issues. We know what this country is in, the mess that it's in. And to his credit, again, Vivek called it out. We're in a dark moment in America. We've got to be able to say that out loud. We know the issues. We know the people on that stage and what they're going to say. We can predict what they're going to say. They've been in the news. They've been in the media. Trump also. And for us, for the people that are in the MAGA movement, at least, Trump's the only one. And he's thinking to himself, why people know me? They know what I'm going to say. They know what the issues are. They know that I've done it once, and that he's the only man on the planet. I mean, I would put it to you, find me somebody else, the only person on the planet who can take what he's taken. And we'll look at the track record that he did in his 4 years while he was being impeded by everything fake, phony, and fraudulent that they could throw at him. And he still achieved greatness in the 4 years. Imagine what he would do unfettered and not having to worry about that, and having learned lessons. To Eric and Don Jr.'s points, they didn't know what they were doing. It was brand new, but now we know we're going to make a difference even better than we did before. There's nobody else that can do it. He handles it well. He doesn't appear, at least in the private moments that I saw him, to be affected by it at all. I'm sure that he strategizes about it. He looked a little thin. I thought he looks like he's lost a little bit of weight in that truck. I have not seen it until you just played that clip, but I think he's handling it very well. And the reason he didn't show up is because there was no need.
Kerry, I want to get your thoughts on that. And also, did you think that the indictment segment of the debate served the intended purpose?
Yeah, well, first, I think with Trump, if you look at the core values of what it means to be a liberal or conservative, so like theoretically to be a liberal means you're more tolerant or open-minded, more likely to have a passport, but of course, modern day liberalism has been totally taken over, as you mentioned earlier, by the Marxists. So theoretically, if you're a liberal, you're supposed to be more open-minded and tolerant. And then if you're conservative, one of your core values is the value of loyalty, that you value loyalty, you value patriotism, you value faith, you value family more than a liberal does. And for conservatives, I think what happened with Trump and the indictments, part of why his approval rating went up, was because it activated that core value of conservatism, which is loyalty. That if you look at the survey data on how conservatives and Republicans view these indictments, overwhelmingly, they believe that it's politically motivated. Because look at the timing of it. How is it so perfectly laid out? I've dealt with some legal issues with my brother and just different family members in court. Things don't line up perfectly with 4 charges, all bing, 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 right? As you're, in the campaign heats up. Like it just seems so flagrantly. And then also to know the double standard in terms of how the charges have been applied to him versus other prior presidents. And then even just the question of whether you can challenge an election, Bush v. Gore, things that Al Gore did, things that Hillary Clinton did. It just could have a chilling effect. So I think that Trump realizes that, and I think that that's part of why he seems to be at peace about it. I think that in terms of the debate question, I think it definitely backfired for Ron to make him look like he was a follower rather than a leader. When asked about
unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap here. We're running out of time. Kerry Sheffield, Doug Billings, Roger Simon, thank you so much for joining us with your analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thank
you,
Steve.
We'll be back.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with another panel to discuss.
We are being censored. America's news outlets no longer provide the truth. 90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The Epoch Times is independent. We're not controlled by any special interest, and we never will be. This is a battle between truth and deceit, a battle between forces that would ensnare this country in ignorance, and between a media that wants to present you with the truth. Subscribe today to our digital edition at theepochtimes.com and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. Read the difference on all your devices. We'd love to have you on board. In every country communism gains power, authoritarianism and death followed in its wake. Communism promises a world without suffering, and yet, in its execution, does the exact opposite. Following Lenin's death, Stalin's 29-year reign killed an estimated 60 to 66 million people. More famines and purges would occur. The very peasants that communism was supposed to benefit instead starved to death under its rule. The party dictates what is right and wrong. Mao ended up killing between 50 million and 70 million people. As an investigative journalist, I want to understand why.
Welcome back to our special live coverage of the first GOP presidential debate. And joining us now, we have Dan Lipinski, former Democratic congressman from Illinois, Chuck DeVore, former California state representative who's with the Texas Public Policy Foundation now, and Jenny Beth Martin, co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. Thank you all for joining us. Jenny Beth.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, Jenny Beth, if we could get your thoughts, high-level overview, winners and losers tonight.
Well, I think that the winner of the debate was a man who was not in the room, President Trump, on debate. It looked like the adult in the room was actually not in the room, and he was having a longer, more in-depth conversation with Tucker Carlson on Twitter. The rest of the candidates tried to address issues, but the format of the debate didn't give them time to really expand on anything, didn't give the American people time to understand in depth what the other candidates think, and the moderators had a hard time keeping control of the debate.
Congressman, I'm assuming you weren't too emotionally attached to any of the candidates, given the fact that you're a Democrat. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, obviously, a number of the candidates went after Vivek Ramaswamy. I think because he's higher up in the polls, but also because I think they personally found him kind of obnoxious and condescending. I think a lot of things that Vivek said probably sounded really good. How he's going to get rid of teachers' unions in the country and get rid of all these departments is really impossible. So he said a lot of things that sounded good. I think that's going to appeal to a lot of people. Pence, I thought, came off really well. If you're going to accept the things that he said about Donald Trump, I really liked. I really think Chris Christie is the one who would do the best against Joe Biden or whoever the Democratic presidential candidate is going to be, because he is very good at debating. He's very good at attacking, but he always knows how to come back to talking about his experience in making his case, as he did at the end, comparing himself to Ronald Reagan. I thought Ron DeSantis did a decent job, but he certainly didn't come off as a sort of the front runner, the big candidate in the room. And so those were my general feelings about it. Nikki Haley did. I think she thought she was up and down. She had some good moments also.
Chuck DeVore, very curious to get your thoughts. Key takeaways.
Yeah, so I think one of the key takeaways is during the debate, what matters is not so much what happens in the moment, it's what people take away in the following days and weeks after the event. And the question that kind of the impression that people are left with is who acted the most presidential? And if you look at, who was making the points and counterpoints and who was attacking and being attacked, what was fascinating to me is the two individuals who probably were acting the most presidential in that they weren't getting into these kind of fist fights or knife fights with each other were Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Tim Scott, with, I think, an edge to Governor DeSantis. I also think that Donald Trump made a tactical error by not participating because if there were 9 people on that stage rather than 8, given the time constraints, Trump would have absolutely dominated the event. It would have all been about him, and no one else would have been able to get in a word edgewise. And so I think what may happen from this is you might see Vivek Ramaswamy begin to fade. I don't think he had a great night tonight. I don't think he was acting particularly presidential. And I think that what you may see is Governor DeSantis consolidating his position as number 2.
Chuck, you bring up a lot of interesting points. Speaking of, strategy and tactics here, we are in a primary. It's not a general. The dynamic is different. So with that said, did you get the sense that they were, the candidates were catering to a certain audience? Were they catering to the, Iowa voters, New Hampshire voters? Who were they speaking to tonight?
Yeah, that's a great question because, of course, there are several different constituencies that they're trying to reach, not only regional constituencies and voting constituencies and certainly even generational. You saw Vivek, of course, do that with an appeal to his youth. You saw Vice President Pence respond with an appeal to, age and wisdom, if you will. So you saw that sort of back and forth. I think another element, of course, are the pundits, the people like us who comment on these sorts of things, the media. What is the takeaway going to be tomorrow? What sort of headlines are we going to read? And so you have a multitude of audiences with this sort of debating format. And I think you're absolutely right that there was probably a bit of tactics and strategy involved in the sort of messaging and the sort of things that they were hoping to come away with.
Jenny Beth, I want to get your thoughts. Do you think that any of the candidates resonated with, I guess you would say the MAGA base?
Well, I think that the MAGA base probably at some point is going to go and watch the interview with with Trump on Twitter. So I also think that if you have not backed off of supporting President Trump at this point, I don't see his base saying, oh, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and decide after the Russia, and all of the attacks on him as president, and impeachment 1 and impeachment 2 and indictment 1, indictment 2, indictment 3, indictment 4, that all of a sudden after this debate, oh, now I'm backing off of Trump. I just don't see that happening. I think that when I heard President or Vice President Pence talking about the Trump-Pence administration, I think people are probably, especially Trump's base, are looking at that and going, why would I want the generic when I can have the name brand and the name brand is on the ballot? So I don't see that that's going to pull people away from his base. I think that the candidates did talk about issues that the Republican Party cares about, and issues in a way that differentiates the Republican side from what we're seeing out of the Biden administration and the Biden White House. And I think that that is good for America, for us to be having that comparison between this set of ideas versus what we have right now in the White House.
So, Congressman, people are very polarized today when it comes to not just Trump, but frankly, with politics on both sides of the aisle. And Trump today notably did not rule out the possibility for open conflicts in our country, civil war, actually. Let's take a look at what he said.
So do you think it's possible that there's open conflict? We seem to be moving towards something.
I don't know, because I don't know what it, I can say this. There's a level of passion that I've never seen. There's a level of hatred that I've never seen, and that's probably a bad combination.
Congressman, are you concerned about potential unrest in our country, and what's really leading to all of this polarization, in your opinion?
Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear on there what former President Trump said, but let me say this. As a Democrat, the Democratic Party, the best thing it has had going for it since 2017 has been Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump is the reason why Democrats picked up seats in 2018, picked up the majority, picked up the White House in 2020, in the Senate. That was Trump. Republicans should have done much better in 2022. And I think it continues to be the best thing Democrats have going for them, because Democrats could just point to Donald Trump, and Joe Biden has done it, is scare people about Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is the biggest weight on the Republican Party right now. If he's not the candidate, then I think he's going to sink whoever the Republican nominee is. And can he beat Biden? Yeah, potentially. But I think in the Republican Party, Trump's support, his solid base amongst the Republican primary voters, is about 25 to 30%. There are still a good number of Republican primary voters who would go for somebody else. I think this is a mistake. I agree with Chuck. I agree with a lot of Chuck's analysis of the debate tonight. And I think Trump skipping the debate tonight, he would have dominated it by his personality. And so I think it was a mistake for him. We'll see if he keeps this up. But I'm not sure anyone gets a real bump out of this tonight. But I think the thing that stood out to me, Chris Christie's comment about he thought Vivek sounded like Barack Obama. That's exactly what I said when Vivek made that comment about the funny sounding name and everything else how he described himself. I think he's a cross between Barack Obama and Andrew Yang.
We're going to pull up a poll here, national average of polls with Trump in a commanding lead, Chuck. To the former congressman's point, I guess, Trump's rationale for not showing up is he didn't want to take incoming from, you see, the 0.7, not even a 1%, or a 3.3 from Chris Christie. Christie, very talented orator and debater. I guess you don't necessarily agree with that assessment.
Well, I don't. I mean, first of all, we have to take the numbers that we're seeing on Twitter with a grain of salt. You have to understand that while I use Twitter, I mean, I signed up for it when I was in the legislature within months of its creation, didn't know what to do with it for a few months, but I started live tweeting from the floor of the assembly, and it was a good communications tool for me. But that said, I think something less than 15% of Americans even use the app. And so, you know, fine, you're on Twitter and you got all these views. How many of them are bots? I don't know. But that's part of the business model of Twitter and Meta and these other platforms. So certainly a debate on a national cable television program is a little more conventional. You're going to reach probably an older audience, an audience that is more prone to voting. And again, I think it was a tactical error. You may see Trump reevaluate as time goes on. Now, the problem is, as he reevaluates, is we're going to probably have a smaller field. It's not going to be 8 people anymore plus Trump. It's probably going to be 5 people or 4 people plus Trump, because these other candidates are going to run out of money and they're going to have to close their campaign doors. And then what will happen is it's going to be a little more difficult, not impossible, of course, because Trump is a dominating figure, but it will be a little more difficult for him to dominate a debate stage if he only has 3 or 4 opponents, as opposed to if he has 8 people plus Trump.
Jenny Beth, I want to get your thoughts on some policy issues here. You know, the issue of abortion is a very sticky one for Republicans to navigate. You could kind of see that in the discussion today. It was a contentious issue as well. I'm going to play sound 9 here from Nikki Haley.
And to be honest with you, Nikki, you're my friend, but consensus is the opposite of leadership.
But when you're talking about a federal ban, be honest with the American people.
We
haven't had 45 pro-life senators in over 100 years, so no Republican president can ban abortions any more than a Democrat president could ban all those state laws. Don't make women feel like they have to decide on this issue when you know we don't have 60 Senate votes in the House.
Jenny Beth, this is going to be a challenging issue for Republicans in a general election. What should the platform be?
Well, I think that the way that Nikki Haley was handling the questions, she's appealing to women, and she was the only woman on the stage. And I think that she came across well in that way. One of the things that she was pointing out is the fear that many women have about the potential policy changes. And it's important to be honest with them and make sure that they understand what the political reality is about the potential changes because of the Supreme Court decision from last year. As far as the specific policy when it comes to the abortion issue, that is an issue that our organization normally doesn't take a strong stand on. I think that we need to be pro-life and we need to advocate for life, and we need to show and make sure that people understand that there are alternatives to having abortions, and also make sure that voters and women understand that there still are a lot of people in this country who want to continue to have abortions up to the very end of pregnancy. And I think that especially that particular issue resonates as a super majority issue that most Americans, whether you're a woman or a man, don't think that we should be having abortions in the 39th and right up until the 40th week of a pregnancy.
Congressman Lipinski, are Democrats, or not all Democrats, but some that are for, like Jenny Beth said, abortion to very late stages in pregnancy, is that a little bit extreme in your opinion? Where should Democrats be on the issue?
Well, I lost my seat in the House after 16 years in a Democratic primary because I was pro-life and unabashedly pro-life. And I appreciate the direction Nikki Haley was going with her answer, but I think that anyone who's pro-life, and I wrote this about a year ago in an article where I said I think there should be right now the pro-life movement should support a federal ban at 15 weeks. The states can do a ban in an earlier time, but I think that Republican voters will be looking for a presidential candidate who at least is going to say that and not run away from this being a issue that the federal government can and should act on. But look, it's clear there's not going to be a abortion ban. I mean, right now they're on to vote for 15 weeks. But I think something that could be leadership towards. I think Mike Pence did a very good job of appealing to evangelical Christian voters, which are going to be very important in Iowa. Mike Pence and Tim Scott. Tim Scott, I really like Tim. I served with Tim. I think he. I wish he would have come out and been a little stronger tonight. Maybe he's waiting for his moment later. But he was the other candidate who was really appealing to the evangelical Christian voters who, again, they're really important in Iowa. And Iowa, as we all know, is going to be critically important in narrowing down the field.
Chuck, you could touch on the abortion issue. Definitely want to get your thoughts, but also if you could, share with us what you thought about the candidates' discussion on Ukraine.
Yeah, so first of all, I think that Congressman Lipinski is completely correct, and you began to see some discussion among the candidates about setting kind of a minimum national standard at 15 weeks, and also focusing on where the Democrats are today, mostly, right, with allowing abortion on demand up until the moment of birth, and how vast majorities of Americans are terribly uncomfortable with that on both sides of the aisle. So, going with kind of a basic standard. Now, hitting the Ukraine question, I think what's very fascinating to me is this kind of playing to the current mood among members of the Republican Party. They're very concerned about the fact that we have a commander-in-chief who had a debacle in Afghanistan, embarrassed the country. 13 heroes died at Kabul airport with this botched, chaotic withdrawal. And then the failure of deterrence in Ukraine, and the fact that our president was slow and sluggish to the action. It was actually the Europeans that stepped up first. And Biden offered a ride out of town. And of course, Zelensky, whether it was apocryphal or not, said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. And so America's been playing catch up as this president has largely been asleep at the wheel. And God forbid that happens with China and Taiwan as well. And so there's a certain reluctance among the Republican base, given the record of our foreign policy establishment going back to the eventual defeat in Vietnam, going back to this long-term engagement in the Middle East that didn't seem to ever resolve anything, these failed experiments in nation building, both Iraq and Afghanistan, the failed intervention in Libya. These are things, by the way, that I sounded the alarm about 10 and 15 years ago when I was in the legislature and when I ran for the U.S. Senate in California in 2010. And even back then, I was accused of being weak on the war on terror. And I kept trying to refocus people, saying the existential threat to this country comes from the People's Republic of China, not the Taliban, that don't have an industrial base, they don't have a weapons of mass destruction program, et cetera. So I think a lot of the reluctance over Ukraine comes from this hesitation based on the really poor track record. And I think that Ambassador Haley provided some clarity, as did former Governor Chris Christie. But the base doesn't really want to hear it right now. So it's just where we are at the moment. The party of Ronald Reagan is kind of shifting back a little bit, I think, at this point in time, to a more isolationist stance.
Chuck DeVore, Jenny Beth Martin, former Congressman Dan Lipinski, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And this concludes our special coverage of the first GOP primary debate of the 2024 presidential race. Thanks to all of our special guests who provided informed perspective throughout our coverage. We hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the candidates' positions, the dynamics at play, and the potential impact on the road ahead. Be sure to stay locked into the Epoch Times and NTD for all of the latest in the 2024 road to the White House. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay informed and continue to seek the truth. Good night.